women and men.
Article 1 on the UN Treaty on Women would abolish discrimination against women in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. This treaty covers marriage, family, church practices, other religious customs and beliefs, and every other area where society might otherwise choose to respect those differences. In case of any doubt, Article 2 states that the treaty would even extend to what it calls customs and practices. Article 3 would require us to pass new federal laws in social, economic, and cultural fields. Article 16 levels a broadside attack on states' rights and would obligate the federal government to take over all family law, including marriage, divorce, child custody, and property. And who would decide if you and your family are abiding by this UN treaty? A United Nations committee set up by Article 17.
This treaty, like other feminist exercises, is full of deception, and it's a good illustration of how people who have a political agenda to gain power for themselves use words to persuade others to join them through deception. A good example is the word family. When you or I use the word family, we mean mom, dad, and the kids. We mean extended family, grandma, grandpa. When they mean family, they mean two guys who met each other in a bar on Saturday night and have decided to live together. They mean any collection of people who have a either permanent or temporary interest in one another. That is just not what the rest of us mean by family, yet feminists will constantly invoke the word family with their own meaning in mind, hoping that we'll be fooled.
For example, Article 5 would require us to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women, and to assure that we are following UN dictates about family education. And Article 10 would even require the revision of all textbooks and teaching methods to adhere to UN definitions about family and feminism.
The people representing the family legitimately and so forth, they were not permitted even to participate. And all of these wild-eyed people who want the government to control families and everybody else, they were in charge.
Jesse Helms is chairman of the U.S. Senate subcommittee that oversees treaties. He opposes these UN treaties.
Well, of course, these treaties that emanate from the United Nations, they are looking after somebody else's welfare, not the welfare and the rights of the American people. And that's the reason I look askance at every one of them.
Meanwhile, the Clinton administration is pushing hard for another series of treaties that would give international organizations control over our national economy. The Chemical Weapons Treaty purports to ban chemical weapons, but many critics believe this will seriously damage U.S. national security.
There are parts of the treaty that seem to suggest that you cannot put intelligent limitations on the export of technology, that everyone who signs the treaty must trade freely in all of the technologies of chemical warfare. Well, of course, every other country in the world would love it if they could have immediate required access to American technology in this area. We probably have the most sophisticated such technology in the world. I don't want to export that technology. I don't want there to be a treaty out there that even hints or suggests that we have to. That's something over which we must exercise control, and we must make the judgments. We, meaning leaders whom we can hold responsible.
But the UN Chemical Weapons Treaty provides no such accountability. Though it would give both allies and enemies our most sophisticated technology, many dangerous countries, such as Libya, Syria, Iraq, and North Korea, have not signed the treaty. Other countries with significant chemical weapons arsenals, such as Iran and Russia, have indicated that they will not comply with the treaty. In spite of the potential damage to U.S. national security and the unverifiable and unenforceable nature of the treaty, the Clinton administration succeeded in getting the U.S. Senate to ratify the Chemical Weapons Treaty in 1997.
The Chemical Weapons Treaty, of course, doesn't do one thing to protect the American people against chemical warfare. Yet it has caused many people to have a false sense of security.
It's interesting. We have a new chemical weapons ban treaty for which the people that are most likely to threaten us are not a party to. It's not much of a treaty. What did we accomplish with it? We accomplished nothing other than limiting ourselves to have a weak negotiating position with those very adversaries that we face today.
Another dangerous UN treaty that would damage our national economy is the law of the sea. Nearly 3/4 of the world's surface is covered by water. American companies harvest minerals from the sea that are important to our industrial and military defense. In the late 70s, the Carter administration developed a treaty that would effectively give the United Nations decision-making authority over the world's vast ocean riches.
And we have succeeded in adopting a convention covering practically every aspect of the uses and resources of the sea.
But President Ronald Reagan opposed the treaty. Doug Bandow worked on the law of the sea during his administration.
It really did two things. The first is it established a principle of essentially socialism. It said that all the unclaimed resources on the seabed would be owned by, as they put it, the common heritage of mankind. What they meant, of course, was by the United Nations. And the ownership would be vested in governments around the world. And he saw that as utterly inconsistent with the principles of free enterprise. His second concern was the way the UN would implement that principle, which was essentially to create another United Nations called the International Seabed Authority. And that Seabed Authority would have under it, its own corporation, the enterprise, to go mine the seabed on behalf of the governments of the world. And this would run like the United Nations. It would have a council and an assembly and committees and a huge bureaucracy. It would be taking money from the West, the industrialized countries, and giving it to third world countries. So it would be part of this whole scheme of what was called the New International Economic Order, an attempt to take money from the West and hand it out to third world governments. Well, he saw this kind of a mechanism as being utterly inconsistent with American interest, and he was quite willing to stand up to the rest of the world and kill the treaty for that reason.
The Clinton administration has revived the Law of the Sea Treaty and is pushing for Senate ratification. If passed, this treaty would expand UN control of the world's economy and build on another highly controversial treaty, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, ratified by Congress in late 1994. The highly controversial GATT treaty locked the United States into the World Trade Organization.
The World Trade Organization is basically a UN of world trade, a Supreme Court of world trade, which will basically dictate to countries whether or not they're violating world trade rules. And world trade rules take supremacy over all internal laws of various nations. So what you got is sort of a global Supreme Court handing down orders to nations and states, and it's got the capacity to allow countries to fine one another. But the goal of this basically is to subordinate national decisions to global decisions, and all national decisions done in the national interest to the exigencies, if you will, of world trade. In other words, if your national decision interferes somehow with world trade, for example, if Americans have a Buy American policy, the World Trade Organization will come in and say, that violates global trade rules, you have to change your laws.
The World Trade Organization, headquartered in Geneva, sets, administers, and enforces global rules of trade. It includes a legislature, an executive branch, and a Supreme Court that decides trade disputes, whose rulings cannot be vetoed by any nation. Despite assurances from GATT proponents that passage of this treaty would not interfere with the sovereignty of the United States, in its very first case, it ruled against the United States.
The first country sued under the World Trade Organization was the United States of America. We were sued under it by the Venezuelans because we would not accept fuels that did not meet our clean air standard. Well, we worked long and hard to clean the air up in this country. We lost the suit in the World Trade Organization, and now a body of people in the World Trade Organization, most of them not our friends, most of them actually our enemies in terms of foreign policy, have now dictated that we'll import dirty fuel and burn dirty gasoline in California because we've signed a treaty, a GATT treaty.